Hey, what's up guys, Benny here and welcome to a Call of Duty Warzone Season 4 video where I've been having an absolute blast trying out and using the brand new weapons to help find the best class setups along with my top 5 tips and tricks for you to be able to get the most out of them. And in this video, I want to focus on the Fennec, which you'll probably also know as the Vector, which is legitimately the best SMG at close range in the entire game. It's a weapon which has minimal recoil and a ridiculously fast time to kill on fully armored opponents, and I feel it blows the MP5 out of the water. So before I show you all of that, 81.7% of you watching this video are not subscribed to the channel, so if you are new, please do subscribe for more Modern Warfare Season 4 content, and I promise you, you'll become a better player. Okay, so first things first, because this is important. The Fennec is described as an aggressive full-auto submachine gun with buttery smooth recoil and a blazing fast rate of fire that is exceptional for strategic room clearing and holding down the front line. This gives you a huge indication of where this weapon performs best. Now, the area that the Fennec is best in class is with its rate of fire. It fires 1,050 rounds per minute, but there are of course a few downsides with this. The Fennec doesn't deal as much damage per bullet as the MP5, for example, with the Fennec doing 40 damage to the head, 25 to the chest, and 22 to the limbs. This means it can take up to 10 bullets to the chest to down a fully armored player, which does sound like a lot. However, because of that 1,050 round per minute fire rate, and the fact that it's really easy to control at those short distances, which is where you'll be using the Fennec, people drop so incredibly fast, with the Fennec having the highest DPS out of all the submachine guns in the entire game. There are a couple of downsides, however. The reload time is fairly slow, and the default mag size is only 25 bullets, meaning to take down multiple enemies in one clip is nearly impossible, forcing you to use the 40-round drum barrel at all times when using this gun. The Fennec's bullet velocity is also not that high, meaning that if you're shooting enemies at a distance, which you definitely shouldn't be doing with this gun, it can be pretty tricky to land your shots if you don't gauge the distance just right. So stick to using it at short range only. So I've been playing around with the Fennec since release, trying out different builds to find what works best in a practical environment, something that you're going to be able to use and pick up kills and, more importantly, win those games. So first of all, I decided against having a muzzle on the Fennec, which I'm really struggling to not call the Vector, so it's quite possibly one of the first guns in the game that you won't be using the monolithic suppressor with, and that's because the ZLR 18-inch deadfall barrel is ridiculous and gives you all the stats you want for Warzone. It increases your damage range, recoil control, bullet velocity, as well as giving you sound suppression for a small punishment to your movement speed and aim down sight speed. The next attachment you're going to want on the Fennec is the tac laser, which is going to increase your aim down sight speed, your aiming stability, as well as your aim walking steadiness, just helping to make the Fennec even more of a laser at close range than it already is. The only con being the laser is visible to enemies when you aim down sight. Now, this will never really be an issue for you because of how you'll be using the Fennec, which we'll be getting onto later in the video. Next is the underbarrel attachment, where you'll want to be using the Merc foregrip. This will help give you increased recoil control, helping to make the gun easier to use, as well as tightening your hip fire spread, which is another area the Fennec is, in my opinion, best in class, as you can just shred people whilst firing from the hip at close range if you need to. Then what I think is the most important attachment on the Fennec is the 40-round drum mag, because if you've got the default 25-round mag, you'll find it pretty difficult to take on 2 enemies at a time, which is a common occurrence in Warzone, especially because the gun has a slower reload speed than most other SMGs. Then the final attachment you want for the best Fennec setup is the stippled grip tape attachment, which is going to increase your aim down sight speed as well as your sprint to fire speed, which is so important when you're rushing opponents, as you want to be able to start shooting in the fastest time possible when you run into an enemy player. Though in my opinion, this final attachment can be swapped for the sleight of hand perk if you struggle with the reload time, especially in quads, where you're coming up against more players more often, and it's really the only downside with the Vector is that reload speed. Okay, so that's the best overall class setup for the Fennec itself, but this is a gun you can't just use on its own in Warzone because it's only good at close range. Anything a little further away and the time to kill drops off a cliff. Partially because of the low bullet velocity. And that's why I always run the Fennec with an assault rifle. One of the best combinations I've found is using the Growl, which you can definitely unlock a little bit easier now thanks to the new Warzone Rumble mode if you haven't already. But the Growl with the Monolithic Suppressor, Archangel Barrel, Attack Laser, Commando foregrip, and then the 50-round mag for solo, duos, and trios, and then the 60-round mag if you're playing quads. Then for your perks, you want to be using double time. A big reason I've started using this when I want to be using SMGs like the Fennec is so I can close distances down quicker, as well as pull off flanks or get an advantage in close range engagements in buildings where players that don't have double time can't keep up with you, so you can get a positional advantage and get the kill. Then you of course need to be using overkill so you can get that assault rifle to pair with the Fennec. And then finally I use Amped, which is pretty much a staple perk in Warzone because that ability to switch between your weapons almost instantly to suit whatever situation you're in is second to none. Another thing to note with the Fennec is you also do not need to be using a sight with this SMG. Honestly, it's just a waste of an attachment and it hurts every time I see someone using one. The iron sight is also super clean and easy to use, and most of the time you'll find yourself firing from the hip and snapping onto targets at close range, so you don't need a sight, which in my opinion only really helps when you're in medium range gunfights. Now that we've got the class loadout out of the way, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips on how to get the most out of the Fennec to help you win as many gunfights with it and get more kills. The first tip I have to say is only use the Fennec at close range. There's a reason the description of the gun says it's exceptional at clearing rooms, and that's because of that high 1050 round per minute fire rate that gives you that insane time to kill speed. However, because of that lower bullet velocity, you'll suddenly start to notice how you'll struggle to take down armored opponents at any form of distance. So you want to be using the Fennec when you're pulling off flanks and getting in players' faces, or when you're fighting inside of buildings, which is quite common in Warzone. You shouldn't be using it otherwise and should just stick to your assault rifle. My next tip for getting the most out of the Fennec comes down to your movement. This is something I don't see people do quickly enough a lot of the time. We've got that Amped perk for a reason. It's not only there to help you switch to the right weapon in a gunfight, but it's also there so you can increase your movement speed whenever you need to move around the map. And when you've got an SMG out, your movement speed is going to be a lot faster than when you're holding an assault rifle. So whenever you're moving positions, whether that's across open ground, trying to avoid gunfire, or even running from the gas, switch to your Fennec to maximize your movement speed. This next tip is one that has allowed me to wipe entire squads solo inside of buildings, and it's an important thing to remember whenever you're fighting an enemy squad at close range with the Fennec SMG. What you'll need to learn to do is the disengage, re-engage tactic. Now, what I mean by this is when you push into a building, for example, and down a player, the likelihood is they're going to have done some damage to you in the gunfight. So what you'll want to do is instantly disengage and go back the way you came from whilst placing up to get full health. And this needs to be almost instant, because the first reaction of enemy teammates and what they're going to tell each other is where you downed him from, and that's going to make them rush that position. This gives them an advantage in a gunfight, especially as you're already weak from the first gunfight. Also, making the enemy make a decision, do I go for the revive or do I push you, which could either take an extra player out of the gunfight, making it a 1v1, which started off as a 1v3 scenario. Just get into that habit and don't try to take everyone on at once, and you'll be surprised at how much of a difference it makes when you're using an SMG like the Fennec at close range. Something I notice a lot of players do is not being 100% sure when to hip fire rather than aiming down sights. Now, personally, I do it when I need to be be the most mobile that I can. So fighting around a rock, for example, or when someone is pushing into a doorway. And because of that Merc foregrip, I know that my hipfire spread is going to be quite tight and easy for me to land my shots with the Fennec. Because remember, when you're aiming down sights with your Fennec, you don't strafe as fast as if you're moving left to right whilst firing from the hip. It does throw people's aim off quite often and can win you a gunfight that you would have otherwise lost. Something that's also important when being the best SMG player possible is speed. In everything you do, you need to be making yourself difficult to hit and doing things like jump shotting, drop shotting, and sliding into gunfights. It's the area that the Fennec is one of the best guns in the game and is going to win you a lot of gunfights, as you want to make sure that you're giving players not enough time to react. And combine that with that 1050 fire rate, you're going to have a great time. Now, I honestly believe the Fennec is going to be the new meta SMG when it comes to Warzone. The MP5 is still going to have its place, but when you're fighting inside of buildings or at super close range, nothing is going to be able to touch the Fennec. But let me know what you think of my setup down in the comments, and if you're also going to call it the Vector. And then click one of the videos on screen for more Call of Duty Warzone Season 4 content, and I'll see you there. Bye!